Hope everybody is doing well. I just got my day off to a pretty good start. Did some of the usual work that I do in terms of assessments and educational assessments and all in that space, since that is one of the lanes that I live in addition to being part of the artistic community. So later on this evening, I'll be going to the Hayti Heritage Center. They've got a yoga class taking place there later on today. And on Monday, they had African Dance for Women. And of course, that is held in the Chuck Davis Dance Studio right now, as Chuck Davis was definitely a legacy person from here in this area that passed away not that long ago. But his legacy still lives on, and many of his dancers and drummers are still performing and still involved in a lot of things in the community. So it's always good to see them. And of course, I saw them on Monday, and I'll be seeing them later on as well. And then, of course, it's a Wednesday. So a Wednesday is the online dinner party, but it's also the day that I get, when I remember to order them, the items from the produce box and all of that. So that's one of those places that you can get some homegrown vegetables, some homegrown fruit. So I've already got my apples, the bananas, and carrots and celery, some eggs, and some other things from that particular service that is offered. So try to get some food that is natural to add to my way too often fast food ventures and all in that space, because we do know that in this age of the pandemic, and it does seem like more and more of us are getting out and about and getting out into the community and doing community activities, doing a lot of community things, that we got into some bad habits. One of my bad habits was going, and that was even before the pandemic, to way too many fast food restaurants and DoorDash and a number of other things. As a matter of fact, I'd be lying if I said that I had not had a DoorDash order on yesterday, and probably one the day before as well. So it doesn't exactly help your economy either. So that's something that I have to do better on. And I'm sure that some of our guests will have some thoughts around that, since I do have some people that are in the exercise space and in a number of other spaces, including trying to be a better, authentic you and a better person just in general and all along those lines. So I'm going to bring them in the not too distant future, see what they've got to say and how things are going in their part of the world and what they are doing in general. Like I said, the weather here is fairly nice and all. It's definitely spring-like weather. Temperatures probably around the 50s and the 60s. I know in some parts of the country, it might even be pushing near more like summer-like temperatures. And we have definitely had some of that earlier, but right now it's definitely feeling spring-like, and definitely been some rain involved, even though I didn't see any today. There was definitely some torrential downpours over the weekend and all in that space. So definitely there has been a part of the conversation. And of course, folks are also following what's going on in the sports world, because I know that the Canes will begin their next round very shortly. That's our hockey team. Yeah, believe it or not, there's hockey here in the Carolinas, but it's been here for a while. So most people know that we do have that hockey team. As a matter of fact, they've even had some success, and there is some speculation they may have success again this year. And of course, the Durham Bulls are doing quite well, or at least they're in the hunt and all in that space. I think they're in either second or third place, but they are the defending champions in minor league baseball in that particular part of minor league baseball. So they are trying to defend that title, and I think defend it for maybe either the second or the third year, because they've definitely had some success. And of course, people are also following what's going on with the NBA. So, there's that whole match that's like the old guard. Some folks are like, they can't even believe that the Lakers and the Golden State Warriors are in there and not in a championship match, but they are in one of the earlier rounds. And actually, the Lakers stole that first game and all in that space. And I'm sure that there are some folks that are Golden State fans that are not too pleased with that, because they have now lost that advantage. But who knows? Maybe they'll go into LA and return the favor. But we'll have to see what happens in that space. I know that personally, because I went to school with Doc Rivers, I'm rooting for the 76ers against the Boston Celtics, and we'll see what happens in that space. They did steal a game as well. So and ironically, he won his only championship as a Boston Celtic in the sense of being a coach, and I need him to win one more, just as a longtime acquaintance. That would be wonderful if we had that as part of our legacy and all in that space. So like I said, I've got some amazing guests, going to bring them in, have some conversations with them for about an hour, hour and a half, and see what they have got going on in their world. And the first one I'll bring in, and I've got a number of them, but I'm going to bring in Stephen Washington, and I know he's involved in a lot of things as well. So, how are you doing, Mr. Washington? Glad to have you here. I understand you understand a little bit about the dance culture, and that's part of the reason that I brought it up in my opening monologue, because I understand that you
Mhm.
might even have some connections to that yourself as well, or at least have some folks that are all part of that. And like I said earlier, I know that your book ends with short qigong mindful movement exercises, and a lot of folks are trying to figure out what is qigong and how that plays into the recovery journeys and all in that space. And like I said, a lot of us got into the whole self-care kind of attitude, and sometimes we even let the self-care go because a lot of us were living at home, sometimes alone, sometimes with significant others. And of course, we even saw a whole new hybrid model happening, and some jobs are still in that hybrid model. I mentioned the educational assessment. I remember when I used to go into an office to do it, but right now a lot of it is done from home on the computer and all in that space. So if you'll share a little bit about your story, I've got some other guests that we'll be bringing on as well, and of course try to keep this all within the hour and a half context. But I love bringing in amazing guests and us sharing parts of our journey. So you're up first.
Thank you, Mark. Nice to meet you. Hi, everybody. So first off, you mentioned dance. Yes, that was one of the things that I think you connected, that we connected together on. I don't think I may have met Chuck Davis once before in my life, but my cousin, Brian, who is no longer with us, he died several years ago, was a dancer with Chuck Davis at one point in New York. And I remember him speaking fondly of Chuck, and also just all the things that I learned about Chuck in my study of dance history when I was in school and all that. But yes, I was a professional dancer in New York for a very long time. I moved to New York in 1989 from Connecticut, studied dance at NYU. Once I left NYU, I started a dance career in the city, dancing for a lot of small dance companies. And then eventually I made my way to dancing for the Metropolitan Opera, and then eventually with Lion King on Broadway and several touring companies. So dance is part of me. It's in my soul. It's in my blood. I don't dance professionally anymore, but once a dancer, always a dancer.
No, I
And
definitely agree with you on that. Chuck used to actually tease me because I would, African dance can be very intense. It can definitely be something that you have to be prepared to get on the floor for and everything. And I would oftentimes make it a point to kind of like slide away from the Bontabon grounds and the front of the dance studio, because I was not trying to get roped into the dance floor and making a what I felt was a two left foot full of myself and all in that space, even though I've now gotten a little bit more comfortable. One of the greatest inventions in the dance world is the strobe light, because with the strobe light, nobody really knows whether you're dancing bad or not, or whether you have two left footed feet, because it definitely kind of like gives that impression that the dancing is going well and all in that line. So the strobe light has been out there for a while, ever since the disco era. So I
yeah.
actually think that it actually can make you look better than you actually are. And
Oh,
I'm not even saying that I necessarily am always a bad dancer. Try to keep the rhythm and all in that space. But sometimes we are our harshest critics. But I'm one like,
yeah. Yeah. That's funny you mentioned that. As you're speaking, it reminds me of someone I used to dance for. I don't know if you've ever heard of him, Ronald Kevin Brown, Evidence Dance
yes,
Company.
yes, yes.
Yeah,
He's
I
done
used
some
to.
stuff in Haiti.
Yeah. I used to dance with Ron for many years back in New York, and Ron is a very good friend of mine, and I love him like a brother. And he's just doing so much amazing work right now, and getting just the recognition that he deserves, because he's such a brilliant artist, choreographer, dancer. Just I love him so much. But eventually, I moved on from dance. I became a Pilates instructor after I left Lion King. I wanted to see what else I could do, because I've been dancing professionally since I was 18 years old. And I began teaching Pilates in New York City. And then eventually, I left New York City to move to California to pursue another dream, which was to become a Chinese doctor. Uh, I started a Chinese medicine program, and I stayed for about a semester, realizing that it wasn't quite the right fit for me. I eventually made my way into massage therapy, became a certified massage therapist. But one of the things that I picked up while in Chinese medicine school is Qigong, the ancient Chinese practice of Qigong. And for those of you who don't know what Qigong is. It's an ancient Chinese healthcare system that combines flowing movements, standing postures, deep breathing, focused intention to activate, cultivate, and circulate life force energy. And when you take the word Qigong and you break it in half, Qi means energy and breath, and Gong means work or skill. So when we practice Qigong, we are practicing becoming more masterful at managing our own energy. And we all could use more energy, right? We all are born with a certain amount of energy, life force energy within us. And there are things that we can do to add to that. That's like breathing gives us energy, food, water gives us energy, rest gives us energy, but stress takes energy away from us. And who isn't affected by stress? We all are. So it takes time and energy and practice to learn how to manage our physical, our emotional, and our mental energy. And Qigong is a practice for that.
And along those same lines, I know that sometimes people think about music and dance as being one of those great unifying forces. I know a lot of people have been frustrated by the divisiveness of America and even of the world and everything. But as some friends of mine that are musicians have told me, oftentimes if you're at a club or if you're at a concert, you really don't care what a person's ethnicity is or what their race is, what their religion is, that you are enjoying that moment, whether it is on the dance floor or whether it is on the listening to the music, whatever style of music it is. Just wondering your thoughts around that as music and dance being kind of a unifying force. And I've also seen dance and even yoga and mindfulness tools being used beyond age ranges. My dad's lady love, and they've been together longer than he was with my mom and everything. I think they've been together for about 20, 25 years, if not longer. But she is a dance critic and a dancer herself out of New
Mhm.
York, Linda Bellins. And I know that she's done some work with dancers that are older. So they are actually of a, older age. They might be in their 70s and 80s and still doing some dance performances on a regular basis. They may not be
Mhm.
doing it as often as they did when they were young, but they're even doing entire shows revolving around still keeping that body moving at certain ages. So I was wondering your thoughts around all of that.
Yeah, well, motion is lotion. The moment we stop moving, the more difficult it is for us to move. So it's important to keep moving because movement is healing. And when we move our bodies, especially along the lines of practices like Qigong and yoga, we activate the natural healing powers within the body. Like each and every one of us has healing potential and power in our body. And when we're able to get the body to relax and move with a sense of effortlessness and ease and connect to the breath, we open the door for those healing processes to activate and turn on. But as far as the unifying power of dance, I absolutely believe that. I think about all the different dance studios I've danced in over the years and just the mix of people and how so many different types of people are brought together. I think about all the dance classes that I used to teach and study and take with Ron Brown when I was dancing with him. And when we would travel, just how many people would turn out for these community classes and how it was such a wide range of people of different ages, uh, genders, races, religions, you name it, everyone would come together and we would just have such a wonderful time. And I think about how for years I was dancing in The Lion King, and that's just such a remarkable show that combines music and dance and theater and puppetry and so many different things. And I think about how that would unify uh, all of us together because when I would look out into the audience every show, I would see such a diverse range of people all coming together to watch the story, which is a story. The story of Lion King is such a universal story of family and of coming of age and finding yourself. It's just remarkable, like a hero's journey. So dance is absolutely a unifying um, modality, form of expression in art. And I think about the same thing when it comes to qigong. When I think about all the classes I've taught over the years, all the workshops online and in person, and all the different people who are drawn to this type of movement and this type of medicine. One of the things that I love about Qigong is that it is a practice that is highly adaptable. It can be modified so that anyone can do it, whether you are able to stand, or maybe you are only able to sit, or maybe you're only able to lie down. There are even things that you can do lying down in a bed that could help you manage your own energy and connect to your breath and introduce even the slightest bit of movement into your body. It's really incredible, powerful practice. And that's why I wanted to include it in my book, Recovering You, Soul Care and Mindful Movement for Overcoming Addiction, because I know the healing power of movement because of what it's done for me in my life and in my recovery from alcohol and drugs and cigarettes. I've been sober for a little over 20 years, and movement has been a vital aspect and part of my recovery. There's so many things that I've learned along the way, and so many things, so much work I've done on myself. And one of the ways that I've been able to integrate all the work that I've done, the mentally, emotionally, spiritually, is through movement. And so that's why movement is such an important aspect of my book, Recovering You.
No, that makes a lot of sense. By the way, I was thinking because one of the quotes that Chuck Davis used to say was, "As long as you're dancing together, you have no time for hatred." So that was
Yeah,
one of his
it's
from
beautiful.
back in the day when he was living and everything. And he would lend just about every performance with the slogan, "Peace, love, and respect for everybody." So that was pretty much how he just about ended every performance with certain actions around those kind of things that would go on in terms of the body movement. But unfortunately, I did want to bring up some of the other guests as well. But
Mhm.
unfortunately, one of the things that happens in our artistic community is it sometimes lends itself to addiction and all in that space. So I was wondering if you could share a little bit about that journey as well, because we do know the stories of the Minguses and others that got too caught up in the drug culture and all in that space, because it is a very wonderful world in the sense of the positive aspects, but it is also a lot of intensity and a lot of things that are going on in that space that sometimes lends itself to folks getting caught up in some of those addictive personalities and addictive actions. So I'm just wondering your thoughts around that.
Yeah, I speaking just for myself, I turned to alcohol and drugs and cigarettes because I needed a way to self-soothe and self-regulate because I'm a very sensitive person. And the world is a very complicated and stressful place. And I came also from a very dysfunctional family, a lot of unhealed trauma. And so I turned to those things because it helped me to numb and helped me to forget what was actually going on in my life. And also, that's what was modeled to me in my family. And many of us can relate to that. One of the things that brought me comfort was dance. I always like to say that I kind of walked out of my mother's womb dancing because I just always instinctually turned to that because it helped me to feel better and transcend what I was experiencing. So it's not surprising that I found my way into the arts. And the arts was a perfect environment for me because I felt like I found my tribe. I felt like I found my people. I felt like I could be myself. And I was born to be creative in that way. But there's always an opening night party. There's always a closing night party. There's always some reason to celebrate. The hours tend to be long and late, and that is just conducive to a life that leans more towards wine and spirits and other things. And when I started my time, and I think about my Lion King years, and I did that show for about 10 years. When I started, I was not sober. I was very much addicted to alcohol and drugs, and I was just able to manage it until the end. But I was really starting to unravel, and it was tricky being sober and then suddenly working on myself and getting sober. So being active in my addiction and then suddenly working to become sober and still being in the same place. So what was happening was the place wasn't changing, the people weren't changing, but I was suddenly having to change. And learning how to do that was very tricky, and it was a one day at a time thing. I needed a lot of support in order for me to do that. I needed a lot of help, but I was able to do that, and that's what most of us face. We may find this thing where we may discover that we have a problem with some addictive behavior, and we feel like it may be the right time for us to change, but we still live in environments that may have supported that dysfunction. We might work in environments that may have supported that dysfunction. And so then what do you do? How do you change when the rest of your world isn't changing around you? But the way that I was able to do it was by going into 12-step recovery. And that's what helped me tremendously, and going into therapy and other healing practices that I adopted in order to help me do that. But yes, I think it's fair to say that the entertainment industry, there is a prevalence of substances and addiction, but I'm willing to say that that's everywhere and in every workspace.
Right.
It's just not as obvious. It's not as always clear, but we all on some level have a desire to check out, to numb ourselves, to distract ourselves, to self-regulate, whether that's with food or alcohol, drugs, cigarettes, work, our devices, social media, sex, gambling, you name it. There's so many exercise. There's so many different ways that we could escape reality, even if for a short time. So I'm willing to say that it is everywhere in the culture, and I love that I'm able to have conversations with you about this. I'm able to write my book and talk about it in all the social media content that I put out there that addresses addiction. And I want to lend my face to it because I am a 50-something man of color who has a recovery story, and you don't always see that out there. And it's important that representation is a lot. It means a lot. So I want people to be able to see another person that might look like them, has a story that might be similar in some ways or different in other ways, but underneath it are the same emotions that drive us all, and somehow be able to identify, and perhaps my story can give someone some hope.
Yeah, one of the things that I had mentioned was well, not mentioned, but Hey Tide, which is where the dance studio is, but they also have a lot of other activities, poetry slams that sometimes deal with social issues and a number of other issues. But they also used to have regularly the NA or one of the NA chapters that would meet there. So that was one of the NA headquarters. I think they used to meet on Tuesdays before the pandemic, and they've since moved on to another location. Who knows when they may come back? But one thing that I observed was that a lot of folks were just what you said. They weren't the stereotype of what folks would expect from somebody that is involved in narcotics. There's always that stereotype of the crack mama or the other kind of stereotypes that are out there. But these were a lot of folks that were in the professional world. There were folks that were living as doctors, living as performers, living in a number of professions. So it is something that can impact all of us in society, and we don't oftentimes think about that. And all in that space, there's all those stereotypes that exist as to how it exists and who is being impacted. It's kind of like that whole story around how we portray the welfare queen as being an African American woman from the projects, when the actual facts are that the majority of the folks that are receiving welfare checks are actually white women, and all in
Mm-hmm.
that space. But a lot of times that is not the picture that is given of that particular situation. I wanted to bring in one of our other guests and hear what their thoughts are, and definitely hope that you can stick around. Like I said, I know you've got time, a limited amount of time. I know everybody has their time restraints, but I'd like to give everybody their chance during the dinner party. So I'm going to bring in Carissa. And Carissa, if you'll share a little bit about your story, and I still got to get to Jay and Caroline as well. But if you'll share a little bit about your story and what you've got going on, and we'll continue the dialogue, because one of the things that I'm curious from both of you is how you deal with those inner critics, because that is something that we talk about a lot on this show, is how too often folks are getting that inner critic telling them that they can't do it. I mentioned my attitude about dancing, and there are also those family members that sometimes will be our worst enemies because they're not being as supportive as they should be. But I just wondered if you could share a little bit of your story before I bring in some of the other guests as well.
Well, absolutely. I'm so happy to be here, Mark, with you and with you, Stephen. And as I was listening, it was so funny because I was so engaged in the conversation between the two of you that I almost forgot I was going to be invited to be a participant in it. I was like, this is fascinating. Trauma and movement and healing and dance. I was just very much engaged in that. So it was kind of funny when you actually invited me to participate. But so what I do is I'm a love coach and a healer, and I
Mhm.
work primarily with women, helping them to heal from wounds from the past, from trauma from the past, and to let go of old patterns in love and limiting beliefs in love, so
Mhm.
that they can attract happy, healthy, sustainable relationships.
Mhm.
And I actually I'm from a family of healers, so I'm a sixth generation healer,
Mhm.
and I also have degrees in psychology and in counseling. So I bring both of those things together so
Mhm.
that I can help on the level of objective reality with actual strategy, communication skills, and those kinds of things, but also on the deeper level of the wounds that we have that we carry with us in our energy that
Mhm.
manifest from our subconscious, and that we're not always even aware that are we're not always aware that we are behaving in certain ways or that we even hold certain beliefs. So that's the area that I work in.
And Carissa,
Yeah.
along those
Mhm.
same lines, and I was just wondering your thoughts. I do know because actually there might be a show that we'll be doing with Raven Thistle and Reginald Kearney. They were actually talking about how sometimes we see the warning signs with folks and their children, and we don't do enough to address those warning signs when we see the people that may be abusing our kids of the world and all in that space. And one of the questions that I asked that they said that they would get to later, but since you're here, I'll ask you: is too often folks are in that hurt space, whether it's folks that
Mhm.
are been in dealing with addictions or dealing with other hurt things. And I don't know that there's been enough healing time. So what do you say to those folks that are getting involved with folks that have been hurt? Do they need to give them time? Do they need to figure out how to navigate that space or along those lines? Because I do know that there have been folks, because I've even been in relationships where I knew that the person had been in a hurt space. Sometimes they had even been hurt years and decades ago, and they would bring that into the new relationship. So I was just
Yeah.
wondering how did when you're doing your healing, how do you deal with those situations?
Well, generally, if we are not, we, I should probably start by saying that no one has to be 100% healed in order to be worthy of having healthy love in their lives, right?
Mhm.
There's no way to be 100% healed anyway, because we're all in the process of constantly healing and growing and evolving. But we have specific traumas or specific beliefs about love that sometimes will keep us from being able to connect or to trust or to be open, and those kinds of things. And what I find usually is that if you're in a relationship with someone who has some kind of a significant trauma that's going on, it's usually an invitation for you to look internally and think, okay, what is it that feels familiar to me? That feels like chemistry, because often what feels like chemistry to us is
Mhm.
that this other person has the same wounds that we have, and it feels familiar to us on a deep subconscious level. So very
What
often we may be looking at the other person and thinking they sure have a lot of stuff to heal, and not really maybe looking at
Well, I was going to go there because sometimes, and I'm sure that even Stephen can relate to this as well, that sometimes creatives in general have a habit of being empaths, and part of being an empath is also, and this is the negative part of being an empath, is that it can sometimes lead you to being there's a term for it, people pleaser, and I think that that can be a problem
absolutely.
as
Mhm.
well, both in terms of the relationships and the recoveries and everything else. So I'd love to hear your both of your thoughts about that because I do think that sometimes creatives have a tendency to be empaths and empaths have a tendency to be people pleasers, and that can lead to problems even in terms of what you might get involved with, whether it's substances or, as you alluded to, Stephen, other bad habits or what folks might consider bad habits, or whether that's just kind of like letting folks trample on you to some degree as well. That
That's
can also
so
go in that people pleaser role as well.
that's so interesting. When I think about my own story, I mean, like I said before, I'm a very sensitive person. I was a very sensitive child. I grew up in a very chaotic environment, which I felt everything. But I
Mhm.
think all of that together makes me the artist that I am.
Mhm.
It really feeds who I am as a creative person. So you can't really separate it, and nor would I want to, because it makes me who I am and very unique. But it's just a matter of also, I think, learning how to understand yourself a bit more and taking what I think of as my gifts, and really looking at them as gifts and not things that are strikes against me, and using them as like a superpower. Like I have superpowers, and part of my superpower is my sensitivity and my creativity and my ability to understand the suffering of other people.
Mhm. Absolutely. I talk to my daughter about that really often because she's a highly sensitive person
Mm-hmm.
and also an empath within that. And so a lot of times when people are telling her that she's sensitive or that she needs to toughen up or things like that, I'll talk to her about the strength and the power that there is in sensitivity. Because one of the things that's so different and special about that type of sensitivity is that she is very moved by beauty.
Mm.
She is very touched by beauty in a way that a lot of people aren't
Mm.
if they're not sensitive, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So we talk about things like that, about how it makes her such a caring friend,
Mm-hmm.
you know, how it makes her very aware of and able to describe what she's feeling.
Mm.
You
Yeah.
know, I remember one time she was 2 and she said, I overheard her talking to herself. And she said, she was looking at me. I could kind of see her out of the corner of my eye. She was looking at me and she said to herself, Mommy is not angry. Mommy is thinking.
That's so
I
sweet.
realized that my face, you know,
Oh.
like she was able to go, that's
Mm-hmm.
what's happening there.
Oh,
And I
wow.
thought, like, that's deep, that's a sensitive soul.
That's a
So,
gift. That's such a
That is
gift.
very much of a gift that she was able to recognize what was going on in your space and all along those lines.
Mm-hmm.
That's an amazing gift, and I don't
and I
know
was
that
so
we
grateful.
and I don't know that we recognize those gifts that we have and everything in that space. So I was wondering for both of you, and then I'm gonna also bring in Caroline as well. How much do you feel that we don't recognize our gifts as much as we should? Because a lot of times, like I said, you discovered your love of dance. It sounds like you discovered your loves at a very early age and everything. I actually was in broadcasting when I was a teenager because my parents decided, with no radio background whatsoever, that they wanted to form a radio station because I was a preteen and they were listening to the radio and they were going like, well, we like jazz. There's no jazz on the radio. We like blues. There's no blues on the radio. And we want to hear our voices, meaning the voices of minorities and the voices of folks in the rural community heard. And nobody is doing that. So why don't we go to the FCC and make a license request? And they got that license request. And as you know anything about nonprofit radio, you know they're usually associated with a college or something along those lines. But they did it as a community radio station, and it stayed on for 12 years. So they were like, if nobody else is going to do it, let's do it for ourselves. So they went ahead and had that kind of attitude and everything. So it's amazing, but I think that too often we don't know our gifts. And I have to tease you, Stephen, because I was wondering because you were part of the Lion King for a number of years and all in that space. There is another movie that is very popular now. It's getting ready to be the other versions of it. Well, actually, there have been 2 versions now. There's going to be a 3rd version. But when you see the Lion King and Black Panther actually have some similarities in the sense of that Afrofuturism kind of message and everything. So I just wondered, do you ever pay attention to that parallel, or you're like, no, that's the movie version and it has nothing to do with my Lion King version? Because sometimes when I see those stories, I'm like, there's some parallels here and everything, but one is more of a movie version, and the other, of course, had that long Broadway run.
Yeah, that's interesting that you mentioned that. I haven't really thought about the parallels so much, but now that you mentioned it, I can see the parallels. And for me, it's on many different levels because one of my old colleagues in the show was actually the brother of Chadwick. So yeah, so there were so many different connections and layers. Um, for me with that show and the show that I had done. And I mean, I think the story is just about the strength and the resilience of Africa and its people, and how the themes and the stories are universal. It doesn't matter what everyone looks like on the surface. We can all relate to uh, stories of family, stories of coming of age, stories of feeling like an outcast, and stories of, like, what it's like to come home and reconnect and love and all that.
No doubt. Carolina, you'll share a little bit about your story. Like I said, the dinner party, we love having the different guests share their stories and all, and then have these general open conversations and all that. And I'll bring in Jay as the last one. And like I said, I'm very respectful of people's times. We go to about 5:30 or so, and I know that Stephen probably has to leave in about 15 or 20 minutes. So there is a question that I ask everybody that he will be the first one to get to and all in that space. But Caroline, if you'll share a little bit of your journey and your story.
Sure. Thanks, Mark. It's good to be with you. And Stephen and Carissa, lovely to see you as well. Happy to spend time with you. I think there's a really cool thread here. Stephen, I'm a former opera singer, so former performer, and still do that, but it's not how I earn my living. It's not my livelihood anymore. But Carissa, I can also see the similarity in helping people. And my career focus now is as a career coach. So I help people navigate that journey, which can often be tumultuous and difficult, so they can live their best lives. Because as you probably all know, when you're happy in your career, you're more happy and healthy in your life as well. And they're very interconnected. So I think it's really cool just to think about the threads and how we are all connected here. And
Well,
it's
speaking of that thread, one of the things that I know has been going on for a while, and I kind of alluded to it earlier, but I'd love to hear all your three thoughts on that in everything, is that in this new age, so many people are trying to balance their work and their life. They're doing that whole work-life balance, and sometimes it also involves having a multitude of jobs. I have a couple of friends that are in the performance space, but they cannot, for whatever reasons, make enough living just on the performance space alone. So they have to do a multitude of jobs. You just heard me earlier say that I do test grading, but I also do a bit in the entertainment and media space. So I can say that I fall in that category, but there are a number of others that fall in that category as well. I have some friends that are performers that are driving Lyft or driving DoorDash or driving Uber or a number of other things. So it's that whole balancing as to how do you balance the various jobs, because to me, there's a difference. And I don't know whether you will agree, Caroline, but there's a difference between a job and a career. A job is what you do to pay the bills. A career is what you do that you have a passion about, and all in that space.
Totally agree with you. And I will say I have been a side hustler for many years, right? I've had the primary gig and then all the other ancillary gigs, because as Stephen knows, unless you are affiliated with an organization with an annual contract, you got to pay for your own health care and all those things. You know, if you want to feed a retirement account or save, you've got to do that on your own. So it's not unusual to have all those other streams that come together to support you holistically. And I agree. I mean, there are times in my lives where I've had those jobs to pay the bills, and I'm happy and eager now to help people find that, whether it's the mosaic that you put together to have this vibrant picture, which is your whole life, or a singular career, which can really honor you in your values, your interests, and your personality and your strengths, bringing it together. And it's a different world as we navigate this post-pandemic journey. The career world has changed dramatically.
Well, that's one of the things I was going to ask about the career world, and I'm going to bring in Jay as the last person and everything. But even in the career world, in this post-pandemic era, we're seeing so many people, like the corporations are trying to get people to come back to work, and folks are like, no, I'm getting kind of comfortable being at home doing work and being able to do it in my pajamas or whatever else I felt like doing it in. So therefore, I'm not exactly rushing to get back to the job force. So there's this whole hybrid model. We've even seen it in the performance space. And we've seen a number of concerts are there in the physical place, and people are enjoying being in the physical place, but they also have to live stream it because there are some folks that are not comfortable being out in the public. So they are definitely wanting to see, say, a Lion King, but they don't want to go to Broadway to see it. So they might want to see the live stream version and all in that space. So it seems like it's a new hybrid model that I don't know we're ever going to get out of, because it seems like it's going to be the new normal. But I was just wondering your thoughts.
I think so. And I think it's a good thing. You know, we had this forced experiment for obvious reasons during the pandemic. We didn't have a choice. And I always think of the incredible frontline workers that also didn't have a choice and had to literally work on the front lines of the pandemic. That was so difficult, and is still difficult for many of them. But it showed employers in certain scenarios, hey, we can do this. We have this, you know, almost 2-year case study of success working from home or wherever we were remotely. And I think really smart organizations are going to retain great talent with flexibility. There's no one size fits all. You need to think about the individual and how they can do their best work. Some people are night owls. Some people are early birds in the morning, right? What is your happy time? I mean, Stephen, you and I know we had to be on at night, right? Because that's when things happen. And we had matinees, right? All the things. But early morning was never my peak time, right?
Oh my God, no. Yeah, I became an early bird when I started teaching Pilates, and I had clients who wanted a 7 a.m. session, and I thought, 7 a.m.?
There's a
Coming
You
from
remember what 7
7
a.m. looked like, right?
coming from Brooklyn, going all the way up to the Upper West Side of Manhattan. Oh my gosh! But I learned to become that, and I started to really appreciate the sunrises. Just
Yeah, no
lovely.
doubt.
And for me,
But
being a sober person, to be able to see the sunrise and not be, having had slept the night before and not feeling hungover as I
Right.
see the beautiful sunrise. So life is a trip.
no, definitely. And Carissa, one of the other things that I saw during the pandemic, and it comes back to the love relationship part, is that because people were in their own homes and in their own environments, I mean, not that it wasn't there before. I mean, people were getting connected on eHarmony and a number of other social apps, but this whole notion of relationships that were so far apart that seemed to be more of the norm. Because I can't tell you how many times I've appeared on Clubhouse or a number of other places, and people be like, "I'm in Los Angeles. My significant other is in Germany," and I'm going like, "Okay, I don't know how that exactly works, but apparently y'all made it work and all in that space." But I was just wondering, is that something that we saw a rise of, and has it kind of tapered off? Because of course it was going on because of the pandemic, and they weren't able to necessarily connect except for that digital connection.
I think we definitely saw a lot more of that during the pandemic, just because it was such an isolating experience, I think, for us as individuals, and it's not normal for us, even introverts. Introverts were having a great time, I think, during the first month or two of the pandemic. Like, if you had enough money coming in and you didn't have to actually go anywhere, but like for me, I was working online already because my clients are all over the world. So there wasn't that much of a change for me in the beginning of it. And I think that for a lot of introverts, those first couple of months were like, "Oh, good, nobody expects me to be anywhere. This is great." Yeah. And then, but even for introverts, as it went on, there is a sense of isolation. I was here with my partner at the time and our daughter, and it was still, there was a sense of isolation to that. And I think a lot of the women that I was working with were making connections online. And what I thought was amazing about that, because the majority of my clients don't go online. So it was a really interesting time. We do things in energy and we heal deeper patterns. And then there are 3 ways that they generally meet people after that. And none of those have to do with going online. But during the pandemic, I think that people wanted to have a sense of agency in terms of being able to connect to other people and create bonds and create connections. And I think the interesting thing that came out of it was it made it so that sex wasn't what you were leading with in the relationship. You actually had to spend time getting to know each other, because you couldn't be even in the same room together. So it was like, well, can we have a conversation? Can we get to know each other?
But to that point, I noticed that during I mean, it's been a word that's been out there for a while, but I noticed that quite a few people on the internet and throughout social media started labeling themselves as sapiosexuals. And I'm sitting there going for a minute there. When I would have friends, I was like, what does this mean? But then I learned that it meant that they were attracted to the intellect and all in that space. But it was a new popular fad, because even some folks that weren't necessarily call it true sapiosexuals were calling themselves sapiosexuals because it sounded cool.
Yeah, well, we do that, right? I mean, that's what we do. That's the whole pop psychology thing,
Yes.
But yeah, I think it was a chance for people to actually stop and get to know each other. And there already is the thing of, who do you call when you wake up and you want to say good morning, and who is the last person you want to talk to when you go to sleep? And if something important happens, who do you want to call and talk to? Who's the first person you want to share that with? And that didn't change during the pandemic. We still wanted to share those things with people. So we had to create connections online or dig deeper into online community, doing those kinds of things. And I think that's, in a way, I think that that's good, but I don't think it replaces person-to-person connection and being in the same room with someone and all those things that you can't you can't really experience without really actually being in someone's energy, being close to that person in that way, and just seeing how that feels.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Going to bring in Jay as well, because one of the things that I've heard people talking about, particularly during the pandemic, was it did seem that more people got in tune with their spiritual self and their healing self. And I think even Stephen has alluded to that as well, because I saw a number of people that were getting into yoga, they were getting into meditation, they were starting to get into chakras and healing and a number of other things. So I'm just wondering, is that something that is going to be a shift that is permanent in y'all's thoughts? And definitely, Jay, if you'll share some of your thoughts and what you're involved in, I'd love to hear that as well. But I'm wondering if that's a new shift and a new paradigm that is going to exist, because it does seem like a lot of folks were even getting back to their daily walks, and definitely can't tell you how many times I've run into people and they're wondering what their chakra is doing. And sometimes they even know what the chakra is, but they want to know what their chakra is doing.
Wow. Well, I think that this, what you're describing, has been going on for quite some time, but I think it's just become much more clear now as a result of the pandemic. And I think that crisis just forced us all to go a bit inward and to be more self-reflective and to focus more on self-care and what is it that I need in order to survive this and help myself feel better and hopefully help others feel better. During the pandemic, I created a online community called SWE Studio, where I teach Pilates and Qigong and meditation and other practices. Because when Carissa was talking about how important it is to, come together in community, and sometimes it's all online and you're getting to know each other through that way. I think about how I've been able to bring people together through movement and through laughter and through dance and all that. And it's been incredible. And I think that that's something that's not going away anytime soon. I think it's here to stay, and I think it will only grow and flourish. And I think people are understanding how important it is to take care of yourself. Our most important job on this planet is to take care of ourselves. And just like the flight attendants say on the planes, put your oxygen mask on first before you help somebody else. And I think that that's just really important, and it's becoming understood across the board more and more now.
No, definitely. Jay, if you share a little bit about your story and everything, and whatever time you got to leave, Stephen, the question I get everybody, and I'll just throw it out there right now so that everybody knows it, is I get people to leave their social handles, and the Pod TV is a global network, and we definitely are all about, and particularly my own personal mission is positivity and hope, and we know that there's all this negativity. So I always try to get all my guests to, as they're walking out the door, to leave a message of positivity and hope to our global community. So that is something that is always one of my taglines and everything, because I definitely think that we need more of that and not less of that.
Beautiful.
Jay, if you want to share a little bit about your journey as well.
Oh, sure. Well, I've been very much blessed by what everybody's had to say. And Stephen, in terms of something halfway, I guess, exercise oriented that I've often thought about, but haven't taken action on, again, it has to start somewhere, right, is the Tai Chi. Mm-hmm. And it's not so fast and slower. That's what I've been, stereotypical knowledge of it. But then I saw one of the Ip Man, or IP Man, however you say it, films, and man, they really got after it. So there's the slow aspect, but yet when you have to fight an enemy, and there are enemies out there, there are dangers in the world of various kind, there's a time to get active. And thank the Lord, I've never been in a situation where I have been mugged or anything close to that. But the point is, in terms of a positive thing, I definitely say pray. And just by miracle, I had two close dangers. I'm claiming that it was angels. One near a car wreck where I kind of slalomed across a median, and I was not hitting any trees. It was amazing. And then on a construction site, it was like a mall was being redone. In the parking garage, they had just put a standard 4x8 piece of plywood. And below that, though, was all the inner workings of, pipes and everything, was like about 30 feet down. And I didn't realize that plywood was actually covering a hole. And I was kind of like physics, every action has an equal reaction. I just pushed against that plywood, and I was able to not drop. But, there's always all these providential things that happen in our lives. And Stephen, since you have your book there, I'll show mine real quick. It's just biological essentialism. And basically, my point about that, and that's my latest book, is just that, humans have a special place. And even though we can learn a lot from animals, and I love The Lion King, I saw the more recent version of it like that. I think they added one song. It was pretty neat. And I guess we're saving all ourselves some trouble by not, those of you that are trained, I'm not going to dance or sing. So there we go. Here, I'll do that. I'll warm out here for a second. There we go. That's it. But that's the thing that the animals that, the critters that we run into, that you can basically classify them. Even a child can recognize, that an elephant and a mastodon are pretty similar, things like that. Or, there's variations of butterflies, but they're all butterflies, that sort of a thing, that we each have our kind of niche and place, but yet there's variety. So that thing, it kind of goes back to Aristotle, but there's kind of essential sorts of things, and that humans have a special place and a special responsibility of how we treat other people, and, how we be a good steward of the earth and our resources and the gifts that God gives us, whether you're a singer or a writer or a thinker.
No, that makes a lot of sense. One of the things that you were speaking that I was thinking about was during the beginning of the pandemic, and I've even argued that at other times in tragedies that the God force or the higher powers or whatever folks want to describe their own spiritual journeys in terms of what is above us and all in that space seems to send messages to the pets and everything. Because I remember that when the pandemic happened, there was all kinds of stories about animals that came out of the woods because we went inside. So they were like, hey, the humans are inside, so we can go hang out. And then I also remember that when 9/11 happened, and that was some 20-something odd years ago, I was hanging out with some friends of mine in downtown Durham, and I observed that it was like there was no birds flying, there was no vermin floating around, no squirrels. And when I've had conversations with other friends of mine in other parts of the world, they paused for a minute, then they reflected on it. They were like, you may have a point, because I don't remember any of those either. So it's almost as if the animal kingdom got this notice that the humans were about to act stupid. So y'all might want to go chill for a minute, and all along those lines. So I do think that there is a connection that we have to pay attention to that we oftentimes don't pay attention to, because I think it was one of you that talked about, it might have been you, Stephen, how much you enjoyed the sunset. And even when I'm going out for a walk, I will see a wild rabbit or a other animal. And sometimes it's good just to pause and enjoy that moment with that animal, and to have that time with them in that common zone and everything, because they're probably also paying attention to you. And sometimes it can even be a house pet. So yesterday I don't have any right now, but I have cat sat before. And yesterday I was walking into my apartment complex, and one apartment over was a cat laying in the windowsill. So I think I was enjoying staring at the cat as much as the cat was enjoying staring at me. We were having that little bit of a pet bond and animal bond and everything, because I used to jokingly, when I was cat sitting, would say that the cat was having its version of cat TV, because I'm just convinced that cats are looking out the window, or even dogs are looking out the window. They are watching us and probably laughing at us in the same time. So that's what I jokingly call cat TV. And we had a guest on one of our other shows earlier today, and they actually brought up an interesting pet moment that I did not know about. But apparently, and there's a videotape about it, there was because they had observed that cats are very observational. Like certain animals are more observational than others, and cats are very observational. So apparently there was a store that I think they were having fish and everything, and they saw the dollar bill being exchanged for the fish. So the cat went and got a leaf, because the leaf would look like a dollar bill, and gave it to the owner, and the owner gave them the fish. So the cat was like, hey, it looks like a dollar to me, so I'm going to give it to him. And that was that observational transaction that took place. So they saw somebody else hand a paper object, and they said, hey, a leaf looks like paper to me, so hand it to him and see if I get a fish.
Mark, it's been a pleasure to be here with you.
It has been a pleasure. I know you got to be the first one to go, so if you will, and then I'll get to the other ones with this other question. But if you would tell folks how they can get that book, and also any message of positivity and hope that you would like to leave and everything.
Yes, everyone can go to my website, StephenWashingtonExperience.com, and you can find links to where you can get the book. It's on Amazon, but it's also on other booksellers like Barnes & Noble. It's Recovering You, Soul Care and Mindful Movement for Overcoming Addiction. But I also want to just let people know about my membership community, SWE Studio. Right now, I'm offering a 14-day free trial of my SWE Studio Please check it out. It's affordable, accessible wellness content, Pilates, Qigong, meditation, dance, laughter medicine, and so many other practices to help people live a more joyous, healthier, conscious life. And the positive thing I'm going to leave with all of you is just the affirmation that you are enough. Just as you are enough. Thank you, everybody. Nice to meet you, Carissa and Caroline and Jay and Mark. Be well.
Be well
Bye.
as well, and
Pleasure.
hopefully we'll have you back on future shows as well. But definitely enjoyed our conversation. Hope we can get you back on in the not too distant future to share even more of your story. But definitely appreciate you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
The other question I was going to ask, and this is for the three of you, and I was going to get it to Stephen, but it's definitely something we kind of alluded to earlier, and you kind of brought it up, Jay. But how important is the ancestral connection to you? Because I know that I am a big believer that the ancestors will give us messages, sometimes in our dreams, sometimes just in our memory of what they left us when they were here and everything. I know that I still have strong ties to my grandmother, who is a librarian, and she's been gone since the early 80s. So she's not been here on this planet for 40 years, but I still think that she has an impact on some of the things that I do and everything. And you heard me mention, or at least, all of you did at the beginning, about Baba Chuck Davis. And Chuck Davis has been gone, I think, for about 2 or 3 years, but his legacy and the fact that he was a parent to many, and we have a commonality, because I don't have any kids of my own. I've definitely dated women with kids, but I don't have any of my own in that space. But I have definitely been the parent figure or the uncle figure to others other than just my own 2 natural nephews, because I do have 2 nephews by my brother and everything. But I sometimes know that part of that was things that I learned from watching Baba Chuck, because I don't think he had any. Matter of fact, I know he didn't have any kids, but he definitely has hundreds, if not thousands. As a matter of fact, you heard even Stephen mention some of those that are common to his whole heritage and his whole dance community that were Baba Chuck disciples and all into that space. So how important is it to have that ancestral connection to all of you? I'll start with you, Carissa, but I'd love to hear from Caroline and Jay as well.
Sure. Well, the ancestral connection is very, very important, because we actually carry trauma, and we carry beliefs from our ancestors that we need to address if we're trying to heal something. There was a study that was done on they used white mice, and what they did was they had them in a cage, essentially, and the bottom of the cage was wired so that when the mice would touch a cluster of cherry blossoms that were in the corner, they would get an electric shock. As soon as all of the mice learned that touching the cherry blossoms would lead to an electric shock, they removed them from the cage and put them in a brand new cage. No cherry blossoms, no electric shock. Those mice all mated, had little mice babies. They took the babies out immediately, put them in a new enclosure, and as they grew, put cherry blossoms into that cage, and those mice would not touch the cherry blossoms.
Wow.
And it wasn't because they had learned, their parents couldn't teach them that because they weren't with their parents. And it wasn't because they had learned it through their own experience, because they had never encountered cherry blossoms before that. And what it shows us is that there are some things that we learn at the level of our DNA and that we pass down through our DNA. And just the same that we can pass those things down. Those things are passed down to us. So we can sometimes have beliefs, or we can sometimes have things that we might chalk up to some type of an instinct that's actually something that is something our ancestors believed, as opposed to something that we've actually experienced. And that belief may have been very helpful for our ancestors at the time, but it's something that's not helpful for us now. And that's something that, if you look at that from just the perspective of maybe psychobiology, that's from that perspective. If you look at it from the perspective of spirituality, absolutely, to maintain a connection to our wise, healed, benevolent ancestors, that's an important thing for us to do, because a lot of times I describe it to my clients as having an angel committee, and I say that you have a group of your, whether it's made up of your ancestors, it could be made up of people who are important to you, that care about you, that care what happens to you, and that are available to you for guidance and available to you for wisdom. And taking time to stop and kind of and honor that is an important thing for us. It helps us to stay connected, and also to realize that a lot of the things that we're experiencing, we're not the first people to experience them. And if our ancestors had the resilience to be able to move through certain things, that we can do those things too.
Yeah, that makes sense. What about your thoughts around it, Caroline? How much have you connected to your own family and your own ancestors and just people that have passed on?
I love the story that you shared. Thank you for that. That was really powerful. And, it's interesting. My dad passed away in 2019, and right before the beginning of the pandemic, and he died of Alzheimer's, and it was a tough journey for him. And he's still very much with me and with my siblings and with my mom, though he's gone. And I'm grateful that he didn't have to live through the pandemic, quite honestly. That would have been a very difficult time, knowing the kind of care that he needed and the kind of access. But his positivity, his ability to watch over me and be part of my angel team, to use Carissa's phrase, is absolutely lovely. But I want to take a little turn here and share something tangential and relevant. So a lot of you may have heard of the term imposter syndrome. And it's particularly prevalent in high achieving people, which sounds like a paradox. And the reality is, we are fed by what Freud called the superego. These are cultural messages that we receive from a very early age, whether from well-meaning family members or society at large. And I'll give you some examples. And it's relevant to what Carissa said about resilience. So, for example, I have, they're passed away now, but I have immigrant grandparents who came to this country for the first time. They were overachievers. They worked around the clock because they wanted to create a better world for their children. Wonderful, beautiful thing. They were so humble that some would say humble to a fault. And they drilled in me from the time that I was a young girl, you've got to be humble. Don't speak unless you're spoken to. And think about those messages. And I'm certainly not being negative about them. There are beautiful, amazing people who I cherish and love to this day. They were fed those messages in their childhood. And that actually impacted, as a young professional woman launching my career, how I negotiated, because I was so humble and I would not speak up or self-advocate. So we need to think about how we take those messages and then recover from them and build and design a future that honors what we value and what will support us moving forward. So again, not being negative about those messages, but translating them, updating them, and honoring those with our current values, and recovering from some of those messages that are not always 100% positive from our ancestors.
Along those same lines, I just want to hear about Jay's ancestral connections, but I'm going to toss it back to Carissa for a minute, because one of the things that I have found in relationships is that there is this notion of non-negotiables, and I think that sometimes those non-negotiables make sense, but sometimes I think that people use those non-negotiables as a negative tool that doesn't necessarily benefit the relationships and all in that space. So I definitely know that, if one person is an Oscar and the other is a Felix, that could be problematic. But there are other times that you have to wonder if the non-negotiables can't be cured and all in that line, or at least if they can't be having some sort of compromise or communication conversation as well. So I just wonder, I've heard a lot of people that have talked about their non-negotiables within the relationship, whether that was a personality non-negotiable. I've also seen people that have had materialistic or job type of non-negotiables that they wanted. Maybe they wanted the person with the certain kind of house or the certain kind of car or the certain kind of career. So I just wanted your thoughts around that as a relationship coach, because I'm sure that you have run across people that have these non-negotiables, and sometimes you might have to allow those to go, and sometimes you might have to pull them back from some of those non-negotiables. That's just my guess, but I was just wondering your thoughts when you hear people that have these non-negotiables, because I've even heard some people that have that whole age range thing. I'm of a certain age, I'm in my 60s and still in that single space. Maybe that'll change one day in life, whether that's with somebody younger or older. But I have seen some people that when they get into a relationship, they're automatically, particularly women, but the guys do it too, they have that age, that time constraint. So they're like, you got to give me a ring by 3 months and everything. And as I jokingly like to say, I'm still trying to decide if I like you, much less if we're going to have a family. And if there's kids involved, I've got to figure out whether I like them and they like me, because it is a whole two-way street and everything. So I don't know that is always exploited as much as it should be. I just wanted your thoughts about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Whenever I see, it depends on how many I see. So part of the process of working with a client for me is that I help them get clarity about what they want in a relationship.
Right.
And we do that through looking at the 4 areas of compatibility. So it's not just a thing of like, make a list of everything that you want in a person. It's actually looking at the 4 areas of compatibility, because those are the things we divorce over. So when I ask someone to make a list and we look at those 4 areas and the list is 12 pages long or something like that, what we're really wanting to do is look at that and get underneath of that. So what is it that you really want out of all of those non-negotiables? Why are those things important to you? Because sometimes saying a certain house or a certain job, that's something that they want in a partner. What they actually want is security, and they don't know how to create that in their own life, or to ask or to create that in a relationship. So the thing that's coming up for them, they're kind of using those things as shorthand to describe what their real desire is, which is for just a sense of peace of mind and security in the world, So a lot of times with those non-negotiables, and it also depends on who it is. If I talk to young men and ask them to make a list, their list is going to be all physical characteristics. It's going to be all the things that she looks like. And it's going to be, if I just say, make a list of what you want in a partner and leave it at that, it will be a list of physical characteristics. If I say to a woman who's maybe in her late 40s, it's going to be it might be a much more developed list. If I say that to a man who is in his 50s, it's going to match more the list of the woman in her 40s, because it's going to be things that are more about compatibility. It's going to be things that are more about companionship. It's going to be things that are more about the life we're going to have together on a day-to-day basis, and us being able to be friends, and all of those kinds of things. So the whole non-negotiables thing, it can get crazy if people don't know why they're actually asking for what they want. And that kind of goes a little bit to what Caroline was saying, in terms of like things that get handed down to us, beliefs that get handed down to us that we don't really question, because we're just kind of it's something that we were taught when we were younger. It's the idea that, women used to get this message really often of that we should marry well and things like that. And that was a thing that was super important. And, there are still echoes of that. So I have a lot of clients who are thinking about how they can attract a relationship with a partner who's well off financially, as opposed to how they can get their own financial house in order and actually have that create that for themselves.
That makes sense. What are the 4 categories? Because you mentioned 4 categories. I'm going like, what are these 4?
So yeah. So the 4 categories are that we need to have for compatibility with a partner. The first one is, it has to do with family and kids. So if we can't agree on how whether or not we want to have kids, or how we're raising the kids that we have, or the type of family structure we want to have, the type of family traditions that we want to have, those things can matter. And they can be things like, if she wants to take care of her mother, and as her mother is ailing, and he doesn't want to really be a part of that, or vice versa. Maybe he's very close to his mom, and she feels like that's an issue for their relationship. So family can be a thing. And for that reason, I tell people, when you're making your list, make sure that on your list you say, I'm a favorite in his family and he is a favorite in mine. So that you can sort of get around that tension in a way. So family is part of it. Another is our physical and sexual relationship. So it can be things like, how often do we want to have sex? Does our libido match? Do we have the same sort of desires? As one person incredibly, adventurous in terms of like kink and all those kinds of things, and the other person's much more vanilla and much more just like, no, I just like regular sex. Is that kind of where we're coming from? It can even be like just public displays of affection. It can be like, do you like to fall asleep in my arms, or does that make you feel hot and like you're suffocating and you need your own space? So it can be those things. How do we relate to each other physically? What is our sexual relationship like? The third area has to do with money and lifestyle. So it comes down to, and that's not in terms of like, you both have to be wealthy or something like that. It's, do we have the same view of what money is? Do we feel the same way about money? Do you have a lot of scarcity beliefs and maybe I don't? Do you have a higher tolerance for risk than I do? So maybe you're an entrepreneur and I'm going to want to be in a 9-to-5 job. And we're going to butt heads with that, because I'm going to keep telling you that I think you should get a job. And to you, that's going to sound like I'm saying I don't believe in your dream. And you're going to keep telling me that I should take risks. And to me, that's going to sound like you want me to do something that feels unsafe. So it's about money, about the lifestyle that we want to have, those kinds of things. That's the third area. And the fourth area is, what are our spiritual or religious beliefs? So we can, whether we are practicing a religion in a traditional way, or whether you consider yourself to be somebody who's spiritual but not religious, are you compatible with each other in that way? And what that really comes down to is, either you're both atheist, which is okay, we don't have to think about our spiritual beliefs, and we can think about instead how we as human beings should treat other people. Or if you do have specific spiritual beliefs, are they compatible? What do you believe is true about God? What do you believe is our purpose as human beings? What do we owe to each other as human beings? And what makes a person a good person? You know, so it's these four areas of compatibility that I ask women to look at when they're thinking about what type of relationship do they want to have. And you can always put other things in there, like a sense of humor, and we have the same hobbies in common, but those things are not the foundation. They're great and they're wonderful and they make it a lot more fun, but they're not the thing. We don't divorce each other over a sense of humor or over not having enough shared hobbies.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I know Caroline's got to get ready to leave, and we've only got about another 15 or 20 minutes in general anyway. But one thing that I was going to say is that I have a friend of mine that has actually done that. They've actually conquered that religious difference, because she grew up in a very Christian home and everything. And I think they're still together. I haven't, pandemic got you losing touch with some of the friends and everything. But the last time I checked, they were still together. But he was of the Muslim faith. But I think that they spent time in each other's congregation. So she would go to the mosque, he would come to the Christian service, and all in that space. And they were actually a May-December couple, because I want to say that she might be around 60s or 65 or somewhere in that age. And I want to say he's like maybe late 40s or early 50s. So there was a little bit of a May-December space as well. But they seem to make all those differences work, and all in that space. Caroline, I know you got to get ready to go. And like I said, we've only got a few more minutes. I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. Hope we can get all of you back. And Jay, I definitely want to hear you can share more of your story as well, including getting to that whole thing around the ancestral connection. But Caroline, I'll come to you first, since you have that time limitation. So if you tell folks how they can get your book and that message of positivity that you would love to share.
I appreciate you. So my book is called Your Career Advantage: How to Overcome Challenges to Achieve a Rewarding Work Life. And my website is really the mothership. It's got my podcasts, my books, my videos, and all of my writing. And that is CarolineDowdHiggins.com, just like you see on the screen, except there's no hyphen. So you just smush it all together, CarolineDowdHiggins.com. And of course, the book is also available on Amazon. But Mark, because I work with a lot of individuals in my coaching practice who are workaholics, and they're working so much that they're missing their lives, one of the sentiments that I want to share as I depart with you all today is, you can enjoy your career and love your life. You don't have to choose one. You should be able to do both. And if you need help doing it, that's okay. There are resources out there to help you, but enjoy your career, love your life. And with that, my friends, I will bid you farewell, and I wish you a great rest of this conversation.
I appreciate you. Hopefully you'll be back.
Pleasure, Caroline.
In the future.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Jay, if you'll share a little bit about your own thoughts as to the importance of the ancestors and all of that, and the other question I was going to get to the two of you, and like I said, we still got a few more minutes, but not that many, is the notion of what I think it was Caroline alluded to it, that imposter syndrome, because that is something we've talked about, is being our own worst enemies, our own worst critics. So I'm sure that even when you were in your book, there were times that you were hearing that inner critic and going like, I don't want to write this book. I can't write this book. I'm not going to write this book at all, and all in that space. I'm sure that you had to deal with that inner critic, and I'm sure that there might have been those outer critics as well, including maybe some family members that were going like, you've got a good job. Why are you trying to write that book?
No, I appreciate that. Well, I didn't meet my real biological father till I was 16. but his influence on my life was tremendous. His work ethic and just various adages, he'd kind of put it into sayings like, he who hesitates is lost, et cetera, et cetera. And so as an example of how he lived his life, and especially as he got older, he took his own spiritual walk more seriously, which was an influence on me. And then as I'm trying to think of where I'm pointing here, the other way, that way. Yeah, there we go. Right there. When I went to OU, I was stayed at home and then commuted for a while from Oklahoma City. And then I moved to Norman eventually. So being away from home, trying to get some good friends that would also help me lead me in the right direction. But when my father passed in the early 90s, talking about dreams, I would dream about him a lot. And then over time, not quite so much. But about a couple weeks ago, I actually had a dream with my father. And again, a positive attitude, not being mean, giving me a good example. So even in the dream, it was like a good message. And then over here on the other side, sorry about this, I don't do this a lot, but there's my mom right there on the top there. There we go. And that's her book. It's actually about my grandma. And so because her picture was handy, we put that on there. And basically, it's my grandma's story, a lot of things through the Depression, a lot of difficulties. But I find those inspirational. And, we think we have troubles, but especially during the Depression era, those people who went through that have a totally different attitude about working hard, not giving up, and do what you have to do to make it. And my mom, as you can see, I have a lot of books. My mom was very influential on me and being literate. And we had lots of books when I was a kid and getting books from the library. And so her reading, in fact, she'd read the newspaper every day. She kind of did the speed reading thing. I took the course on that. I can't seem to do it. But in terms of reading as much as I can, I think it's extremely helpful. And when I went to junior college, Trip C, if you happen to know that, in Oklahoma City, I was a journalist for a year and had the privilege to interview Maya Angelou. And that inspired me to write what little bit of poetry I do. And then also her example of reading all the books in the library. And when I was in high school, they would give away to try to keep track of current events, the U.S. News and World Report, as well as Time and Newsweek. Yeah, it'd be a couple weeks old, but I'd devour them. And it's important to know what's going on in the world. God made it. It's important to see what kind of tragedies are there. And that's where I go to pray. You can't help everybody. You can drop the coins in for the Salvation Army and the Santa Claus. But when you can't help those directly or through your church or something like the Lions Club, you can pray about things. And that's a positive thing I definitely want to share.
No doubt about that. Carissa, I know you've got to leave, and I've got about another 12 minutes or so for the whole show and all in that space. But if you want to give how you can be reached, your message of positivity and hope, and like I told the other two, I hope that you'll make a return trip to the dinner party as well as some of our other shows as well. So definitely any things that you want to share and all in that space, would love to have those comments and your message of positivity and hope.
Well, thank you so much again for having me. It's been a lot of fun, and it's been so interesting, and I just really enjoyed being a part of it. My message of positivity is always to do with love, and it has to do with our feeling that we have to do something to be worthy of love, or that we have to always go out and try to make it happen. And what I always like to remind people and have them think about is that we don't make love happen, we make love welcome. And we do that by healing. So that is my message of positivity. And as far as people being able to connect to me, my website is CarisaMontoth.com, CarisaMontoth.com. And people who want to book time to talk with me can go to SoulLoveSession.com.
Well, I appreciate it, Carissa. One thing I got to tease you about is that I have a dear friend of mine that is always talking about his relationships. He sometimes jokingly talks about the wife of the week club, because apparently he seems to fall in and out of love on a regular basis. So I know some other people that are like that as well. So that is something that we've been seeing, where there's head over heels one minute, and then something takes place, and then they're not head over heels anymore. So that is unfortunately going on too much in society these days.
Well, I'd love to talk with him and help him settle down.
Have to have you have that conversation with him at some point for sure.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Mark, and it was a pleasure to meet you as well, Jay.
All right. You have a good one.
Okay.
So it's just me and you. And like I said, I know I got 10 minutes. I'm going to give you the full screen. But if you want to share a message of positivity and hope and some of the things that you want to share, and I may have one or two questions for you as we're heading out the door, I'm going to give you the full screen because I've actually got to throw on my socks because literally I have to run from job A to job B and all in that space. We're talking about jobs and all along those lines. So I'm going to pop off the screen. But if you have a message you want to share while I'm throwing on these socks and shoes, I'll give you the full screen.
So I would just say that you go in different directions, and I don't claim to hear from God, but sometimes I'll get an impression, and I'll often go with that. And so recently I've done some construction, teaching in a Christian school, and some different things. And I worked for the concrete company for a year. So in my academic background is math, but I also studied a little bit of science because God made the world, and I think it's good to learn about it, whether it's physics or chemistry or whatever it may be. So be willing to try some different things. There was the guy in the 70s, like he was on the NFL for one game, and he did this and he did that, and his name kind of slips my mind, but I admire that kind of a person who has many talents. I'm not very musical, but at least give it a try. And you don't know what you might fall into. And in terms of my main connection, it's really, really easy. It's a totalyouth.us, totalyouth.us. And that has my contact button at the top, has my books and videos, all of my social media connections are there. And I'm more than welcome to chat with anybody who's found this conversation interesting.
Sounds good and everything. You alluded to it a couple of times, and as did some of the other guests. And I did mention some of my own spiritual walk and all that kind of space. But how important do you think it is, your faith walk and your faith journey, even in your own life and everything? Because I know that you mentioned Oklahoma, and I know that there is an active and native culture there, and that's one type of spirituality. And then, of course, a lot of people are very devout Christians as well. But I just wanted your own thoughts around your own faith walk and how important that has been in your life.
Sure. Well, as I mentioned, I didn't have my father around, my real father. Did have some male role models, but especially in a grade school, and my mom and my stepdad got divorced when I was 8. I was just extremely wild in the vice president's office very, very often. And then through middle school, I almost kind of flipped and kind of just was real inside myself, not even talking about personal care. I was not even doing that. And my mom didn't get on me all that much. So I was almost on the depression side. And if the internet was around, I probably wouldn't be here today because I'd have been able to look up, quick ways to end it all. And so the Boy Scouts was quite helpful, and a lot of moral leadership there. But then around 14, I read the scriptures and had a spiritual conversion. And that really helped me on the right path, and listening to things like Christian radio and Christian music, because I think that's important. We talked about music earlier. I think it's very, very important. That's a gift from God and helps us to think in a good way.
It definitely helps us think in a good way. There's no doubt about that. And like you said, there's different styles of music, and some people are into the jazz, some people are into the various forms of gospel, because there's everything from the contemporary gospel to the more traditional gospel, and all of it is definitely helping in that healing journey and all in that space. So I definitely think that music is something that we need to spend more time with. But a lot of folks have been talking about the divisiveness here in the society and around the world. So I just wondering, what would your message be to get people out of this divisive mindset? Because it does seem like a lot of times people are being divisive. I mean, I've even heard people divorcing folks over their stances on everything from abortion to vaccines. But I just wondering your thoughts around divisiveness and how we can make this a more unified society.
Yeah, well, I think it's important to do your best to build some bridges and to understand, have these conversations that you realize there may be differences, but once you actually have the conversation, well, I heard you said this, actually talk to the person and have them possibly clarify their position. And when I was in Norman at OU, for my 2 years in graduate school, I was a member of a mostly black church. And speaking of music, one of my favorite hymns is "A Hold to God's Unchanging Hand," and understanding some cultural differences. And in terms of Native Americans, I would hold that we all come from a common source in terms of, like, Adam, Noah, the Tower of Babel, and all of this, and that many of these cultural traditions have a lot of commonalities. And even if you go back to some ancient cultures, you see that, like, there's Zeus and all this that you do, and the Native Americans talked about the Great Spirit and things like this, that there is a one great creator who made everything. And if you say there were multiple ones, well, kind of like in the Greek gods, they'd always be fighting each other. So Aristotle, just trying to think a lot of these things through, came pretty close. And I think that the trick is to, if you look at the major viewpoints, because we mentioned Islam earlier, read the Quran, read the Old Testament, read the New Testament, and like I said earlier, pray about it and ask God to open your eyes to what the truth is. And there has to be a truth, just like 1984, 2 + 2 is 4, 2 + 2 is not 5. There is a truth out there.
Yeah, no doubt about that. So I've thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. Definitely want to get you to come back as well. If you have any final thoughts, you can share those right now, as we're going to make people hungry, because I've got a friend of mine that has a dish that they have got that they serve, and it's actually tied to their dad. So they definitely have some food that they provide and all in that space. So I'm going to, actually, I think this is the one that's more of the dessert one, and not the one that was the spice one, but I have a couple of different ones. But either way, it's going to make you hungry because it's a food commercial and all in that space. So if you got any final thoughts, otherwise we're getting ready to get to
I appreciate your style of presentation and how you interact with everybody, and allowing everybody to share their viewpoint and bring out their story and to be real about it. I really appreciate that, and sharing your own experience in dancing and related things like that. I very much appreciate your style.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That's what I try to do, is make it like you were at a dinner party here at my apartment. So we're having casual conversation and learning about each other and learning what we have in common, and not necessarily all the things that we have apart. Because a lot of times we can learn lessons from each other and learn things that are that we may not be aware of. Like, I didn't know about those 4 compartments, and I didn't know necessarily about the recovery tactics and the particular style that Stephen was talking about. So it is a learning process for me, the host, as well. So oftentimes I'm listening and learning in the process. So it's all about a lifelong commitment to learning and being a lifelong learner. So that is something I think we all need to do on a regular basis. But right now, let's check out this food commercial and get on out of here.
Hi, my name is Maria Jones, baker and owner of Very Vegan, a premier mobile bakery specializing in putting a plant-based spin on some of your favorite desserts. Inspired by my own personal experience with my journey with healthier eating habits, I was determined to make comparable items with desirable textures and great taste. We're always experimenting with different flavor profiles and expanding our menu. I enjoy my creative license, as well as imparting ideas and requests from my customers. It makes for new and exciting items. Some of our customer faves are the specialty cheesecakes, such as the banana pudding with homemade vegan vanilla wafers, strawberry crunch, honey bun, fruity pebbles, peach cobbler, and many others. We also offer moist, rich cupcakes, delectable cookies, decadent brownies, and scrumptious pound cake. Discover how amazingly delicious vegan can be. I am available for orders, or you can purchase my items exclusively at the Black Farmers Hub.